Was Sue Gray's partygate probe diluted? Downing Street is accused of lobbying the civil servant to change the report. The government denies the allegation, but with the scandal still plaguing the Prime Minister, is it time he steps down? I'm Jafar Hasnan, and this is The Newsmakers. Boris Johnson is no stranger to scandal, but the British Prime Minister just can't shake partygate. When asked about lockdown parties in Downing Street, the Tory leader repeatedly said, "We need to hear what Sue Gray has to say." Well, the civil servant's long-anticipated report came out last week, and the findings did not paint Johnson and many of his colleagues in the best of light. While the Conservative government told people to stay home and save lives, many of them did not.
Sue Gray's report unearthed several instances where Downing Street staff flouted COVID rules. The civil servant looked into 16 events, including one where some were found partying until 4 a.m, less than 24 hours before Prince Philip's funeral. On May 20th, 2020, approximately 30 people attended a garden party in number 10. A month later, staff gathered again for a leaving party. Her report says there's been serious failures of leadership in number 10 and that officials, including the Prime Minister, should have put a stop to the partying. The probe also says security and cleaning staff were treated with a lack of respect, and some who opposed the parties were too afraid to blow the whistle. The report highlights excessive drinking, which led to at least one individual being sick and a minor altercation between two others. The 37-page report concludes saying, "The public has a right to expect the very highest standards of behaviour in such places, and that this government has failed to meet that." Following the release of the report, the Prime Minister offered this apology to Parliament.
The entire senior management has changed. There is a new Chief of Staff, an elected member of this House, who also commands the status of a Cabinet Minister. There is a new Director of Communications, a new Principal Private Secretary, and another of other key appointments in my office. I am confident with the changes and new structures that are now in place, that we are humbled by the experience, and we have learned our lesson. And I want to conclude by saying that Mr. Speaker, I am humbled and I have learned a lesson, Mr. Speaker.
Once the report was out, members of Parliament tore into the Prime Minister and the criticism came from all sides.
Mr. Speaker, this is a damning report about the absence of leadership, focus and discipline in number 10, the one place where you expect to find those attributes in abundance. I made my point and my position very clear to the Prime Minister. He does not have my support.
Prime Minister has lost the trust of the public. He has lost what little moral authority he had left. The Prime Minister has apologised many times, not because he feels any genuine remorse. He still refuses to even admit that there were parties and that he presided over them. He apologised for one simple reason: he got caught.
For those very people to then be having late-night parties, including two on the night before the Queen had to sit all alone during her husband's funeral when the country was in a state of national mourning. Absolutely shameless.
A load of baloney. Excuse after excuse after excuse, and it simply doesn't wash, and it won't wash with the British public, who are sick and tired of being taken for fools. The truth is, the Prime Minister encouraged the gatherings. He attended the gatherings. He poured the drinks at the gatherings. And he even raised a toast at the gatherings, so he knew perfectly well that these gatherings had taken place.
But could the partygate probe have been even worse? Senior officials are accused of lobbying Sue Gray to water down her report. They allegedly demanded key figures who broke COVID-19 rules be kept anonymous, as well as scrapping details of a controversial party at the Prime Minister's residence. Downing Street denies the allegations. Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis told Sky News he was confident no pressure was placed on Sue Gray to change her report.
I don't think anybody would question the independence and the probity of either the police, and I have to say, as I said to you on Wednesday, having worked with Sue Gray in her previous roles and my previous roles, I wouldn't in any way question Sue Gray's independence and determination to deliver a report that she is comfortable is a full and complete report, which is what she's done.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he was humbled by Sue Gray's report. He has apologised and says it is time to move on. So, is it? To discuss that, let's get straight to our panel now, who are all in London. First, we have Ben Harris-Quinney. He's the chairman of the Conservative think tank, the Bow Group. Denis MacShane is the UK's former Minister for Europe and author of Must Labour Always Lose? And Ali Fazel is a former Conservative Party politician, and he was also a parliamentary advisor at the House of Commons. Thanks all for being with us here today on The Newsmakers. Let me start with the big question. Ben, should Boris Johnson resign?
I think it really comes down to if he's proven to have lied to Parliament, and there are a number of remaining questions over that, and there's a select committee inquiry going on into it, and really I think whilst all of the things that have happened in relation to Partygate are quite seriously bad, considering the context and the pandemic we were in, I think that by far the most serious thing would be that if Boris Johnson is shown to have lied to Parliament or repeatedly lied to Parliament, because that breaks a sacred trust that exists as part of our constitutional system. And I think that even if he is found to have done that and he doesn't resign, I think that he will face a leadership challenge as a result.
Okay, so when you say he's going to face a leadership challenge, can he be forced to resign by his Conservative Party members?
Well, if he loses that challenge, yes, he can. I think he has obviously been called on to resign from all quarters, from his own party, from all over the political spectrum. Really, it's what I think's been quite interesting about this is that you couldn't really pin it down to a left-right thing within the Conservative Party or a Brexit Remain thing. Even it's been pretty consistently across the House, and he has obviously resisted those calls to resign, and the number of letters that are required to be sent to the 1922 committee by the members of Parliament of the Conservative Party to trigger that election hasn't yet occurred. But as I say, I think if he is found to have lied to Parliament, if he doesn't resign, then those letters will reach the point where it triggers a leadership election, and then I think in that context there is a very good chance that he will lose that challenge.
Okay. So Dennis, 54 letters are needed to be sent in order to trigger a vote of no confidence. Is it likely to happen?
I can't tell, but I don't think it really will get to that point, because this reminds me enormously of Watergate, which began with President Nixon committing a small crime. Boris Johnson has committed a small crime and a parliamentary crime of lying to the House of Commons, and then is resist. And it goes on and on and on. And even today, we have new information. One of the famous parties, there was another one the same day that Boris Johnson and Number 10 did not report to the Sue Gray Committee of Inquiry. ABBA music, vomiting in the corner of these parties, even sex behind the sofas. People who know Number 10, and I've worked there, are just horrified that the Holy of Holies of the British government was treated in this contemptuous way. So I think what's happening is bit by bit, Mr. Johnson's authority is eroded. There's a fascinating poll, but you've got two Conservative colleagues who can talk about it today, of Conservative Party members, and they put Boris Johnson on -15. The top guy is the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who I think will take over from Boris Johnson, but -15. We've never seen figures like that in British political history. And I think in due course, we've got two by-elections in 2 or 3 weeks' time, which I think the Conservatives will lose. And then people at the top of the party will just go to the Prime Minister, like they went to Margaret Thatcher, like they went to Anthony Eden, like they went to Neville Chamberlain, and said, sorry, it's game over. You have to make your way, because otherwise you are going to drag the whole of the Conservative Party down with you.
Okay, now, Denis, you have served as a former minister in the UK government. Tell me, under normal circumstances, what should happen right now? What should Boris Johnson do?
He's just batting defence. He's come up with some crazy idea that everybody in Britain should return to measuring everything in feet and inches and ounces and pounds and pounds, shillings and pence. I mean, it's imperial nostalgia for probably before he was even born. It's absolutely bonkers. It's been derided. Every exporter saying, for God's sake, we have to export in meters and in centimetres, in kilograms and grams. We can't be playing with these silly games. Everybody's laughing at him. He just goes on and on and on. I don't think there's much he can do because he's done all that he can do as Prime Minister. Some Prime Ministers are there for a boring 10 years. Some rise with a huge meteoric flame and then burn out. And I think Mr. Johnson is in the latter category.
Okay, now, Ali, the allegations that members of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government lobbied Sue Gray to water down her report are quite astonishing. Tell me, what do you make of those allegations?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, look, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. Sue Gray is an extremely senior civil servant who conducted this report and inquiry completely independent to anyone internally in Number 10. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that. What I would say, though, is I think that the outcomes of the report are pretty damning. Regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, I think what we can say is this is no longer just about parties. It's no longer about, what was drunk at these parties, what happened to these parties. This is now also about standards in public life. This is about integrity. And this is about what we expect from our politicians and the people who work and run this country in Number 10. And unfortunately, we've been let down on a number of different areas. We have been let down. And I think it's time that, the buck eventually falls to the Prime Minister. It stops there. And really, we need to see some accountability. Unfortunately, we've not seen that. And I don't think it's good enough anymore to say we must move on, because sadly,
Ali, let me interject. What do you mean when you say accountability? What do you mean when you say accountability?
Well, I think essentially what this boils down to is the fact that do the public trust trust the Prime Minister? And I think at this stage, I don't think that can be said. I think we're seeing increasing growing discontent from the Parliamentary Conservative Party as well. I think we've already seen 35 letters go in for no confidence. That those are public letters. There are going to be a number more that are private. That number is growing from all quarters of the Conservative Party. Essentially, people want the Prime Minister to stand up and say that actually I got this wrong. It's not good enough, and actually I can't continue in this role because you expect better from the public. And so really, this falls down to him, and he needs to make this right. The only way I think he does that is by stepping aside and let someone else take the lead.
Okay, Ben, let me come to you. Now, Boris Johnson has apologized. I mean, he has apologized on multiple occasions, not once. Is that not enough? Is an apology not enough?
Well, it depends. I mean, two things have to occur with an apology. One, the apology has to be genuine. It can't just be that someone is apologizing because they've been caught, and that is their only route out of their predicament. And two, at the point the apology is made, there has to be a change of behaviour. So the big question now, we've sort of gone through the initial phases of the Partygate period, and now the question is, did Boris Johnson or people close to Boris Johnson lean on Sue Gray, get the references to Carrie Johnson's partying removed from that report, and is he still carrying on with the cover-up that previously he had apologised for, and is he still defending parties that he was at or that he knew about that previously he's had to apologise for the same thing? And as I say, and the point's been made as well that in most cases with these kinds of scandals, the issue is the cover-up and the hypocrisy and the lies that go along with that. That's what takes it into a really serious criteria. If this had come out at the time and Boris Johnson said, look, I dropped the ball, There was a lot going on at the time. We made some mistakes. If he'd got ahead of it like that, then I think he would have been all right. But the cover-up that has ensued since, I think, is what's really angered people and what's seen a decay of trust in the government, which is the most important thing, really.
Okay, now Ben, as I understand from what you have just said, there are still many unanswered questions revolving around the Partygate scandal. Denis, a probe was already conducted. What more needs to be done in order to answer these unanswered questions?
Probe was incomplete. We've just been given this weekend information that Number 10 kept secret of a second party in Downing Street at the height of the lockdown, when hundreds of thousands of British people couldn't even say goodbye to their dying relatives. They were banned from going into care homes to say goodbye to their loved one. And Boris Johnson and I'm afraid to say, his wife and his aides sat there, feet on the table, drinking, boozing, bringing in suitcases full of drink. But the problem also is that his chief, the most important civil servant, the most important state functionary in Britain, the cabinet secretary, also is part of this cover-up because he's refusing to accept any responsibility. There are about 200 civil servants who are out boozing during that hot summer of 2 years ago, and he's just in complete denial. We've had another one who was what's called his principal private secretary, his aide-de-camp, a senior Foreign Office official, who texted or emailed people saying, "We've got away with it." And he's being proposed to be the ambassador to Saudi Arabia. I don't know what the Saudis will think about having a chap like that. So it goes on and on and on. The basic problem is that Boris Johnson is a genius journalist. He's one of the cleverest journalists I've known in my life. I know him personally. I like him. He's very funny. He's very witty. He's got full of clever insights. But never in a million years did he have any of the necessary disciplines to be a prime minister. It's a dull, grinding, hard, horrible, hard-working job.
Okay, I want to focus on the probe. Now, you said that the probe was incomplete. Are you indicating that Sue Gray was not an impartial investigator?
I can't say that. We're always told every civil servant is utterly impartial. Well, I worked with them for 10 years in government, 8 years in government, and they're men and women with points of view. The idea that a civil servant would dethrone an elected prime minister in Britain is just nonsense. That's the deal. The civil service stays, they never get fired, they don't get demoted, they keep their pay and their pensions until they retire, and in exchange, the big decisions are taken by elected people. It could be twisters and incompetents and idiots and also very brilliant. But the idea she was going to sort of get rid of Boris Johnson was always very naive. So her problem is she's produced a report and then bingo, 2 days, 3 days later, the weekend press, this morning's press, are full of details that were not in it, perhaps because Mr. Johnson, Number 10, did not give her those details. We don't know. But it's just symptomatic of the fact that Mr. Johnson has run out of time.
Okay. The benchmark against which Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be judged now is whether or not he lied to the Parliament. He misled the Parliament when he said that no parties were held, no rules were broken. What do you make of that, Ali?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, that, because I think it will come down to what Boris Johnson perceived those gatherings to be. And on a number of occasions, he said that those were work gatherings. So coming down to whether he lied to Parliament or not becomes a very complicated question. But I think what the most damning part of all of this is, yes, we got some good detail from the Sue Gray report around what happened at the parties, the wine on the floor, the way the cleaners were treated. So, we got some really good color on the actual details. But the most damning part, I think, was that what it showed us about the culture at Downing Street, what it said about the way in which people who work there behaved during this time when people across the country were making huge sacrifices to protect themselves and their families and their communities. What it showed was that actually people were talking about a potential comms disaster, using the back door to leave to avoid that comms disaster. This shows what it shows us is that essentially these people knew that what they were doing was wrong, and ultimately it's not good enough to just say we've moved on. Now, I know the Prime Minister has said that they have made some internal changes to the operations, the functioning of Number 10, to some of the leadership positions. But is that enough? Is that enough to show the public that this is a Prime Minister who cares deeply about the rule of law? I don't think it is. I don't think the public will think it is. And I think if we are going to focus on some of the most important issues that we're facing as a country at the moment, if we're looking at the cost of living, the energy crisis, Russia and Ukraine, we cannot continue distracting ourselves with these matters, which actually completely derail us from focusing on issues which are far, far more important and actually deserve our attention at this time of crisis.
Okay, Ben, let me come to you. How much has Partygate hurt the Conservative Party?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Denis mentioned Boris's unfavourability rating among Conservative members, I think he was referring to. But his rating among the public as a whole, interestingly, it dropped by a much larger margin before Partygate. It dropped by about 27 points before Partygate and about 12 points with Partygate, and it's now resting at an unfavourability rating of about 70, which is pretty bad. And so both of those drops are significant. But the first drop, I think, is because Boris billed himself as an end to the Blairite era, an end to Cameron and May, and the Conservative Party's learned its lesson. It's going to get back to doing Conservative things. And he just hasn't done that. We have the highest taxes in 70 years. We have the highest number of immigrants coming into the country in history. The government spends more than the last Labour government. It is to the left of the last Labour government in every major area of policy. And I think it's very clear that Brexit voters, Brexit was about making a change, making a big fundamental change. And I think people believed that Boris was going to do that. And he's frankly done the opposite. And that's really the problem for him, I think, because if he had the support of his base, if he had the total support of his base, you can survive pretty much any scandal. But he's getting pulled apart at the seams. The left of the party are attacking him, obviously Labour. And
that's exactly what the polls, Ben, that's exactly what the polls are telling us right now. For example, YouGov conducted a lot of polls over the past few weeks. One of them says 59% of Britons want Boris Johnson to resign in the wake of Partygate. Then in another poll, his approval rating is down to about 28%. Now, Denis, if it does come to Boris Johnson's resignation, who would replace him?
Good question. It will be a serving member of the cabinet. There are non-cabinet members. Jeremy Hunt, former senior Conservative, is plotting and planning and has just written a book, which is always a bad sign for a man who says, I've got no ambitions, but here's my book. Please read it. Please read all about me. So it will be, my guess is that there's a defence secretary who isn't that well known internationally. He's been an MP since 2005. He's not really made big mistakes. He was a major in the Scots Guards. That's one of our super British Army elite regiments. It'll be marching to salute the Queen on Thursday. And he's, as Defence Secretary, has been strong on Ukraine. He also was the Parliamentary Private Secretary, that's a parliamentary aide, to a senior Tory called Ken Clarke, who was a very big pro-European. So he might attract the hidden pro-Europeans in the Conservative Party. My guess is that he would go on to the final ballot. It's a ballot of all the party members of 2 MPs. Who the other one is, well, I leave to Ben and Ollie, they're the experts to perhaps suggest. But I think there are other candidates I could mention who could emerge as Prime Minister, a bit like John Major did after Margaret Thatcher, calm everything down, put the ship back floating and going in the right direction again, and then present a credible challenge to a Conservative Labour Party, which isn't quite there in terms of winning the next election.
Okay, Ali, let me get to your thoughts on this. If Boris Johnson resigns, who is likely to replace him among the Conservatives?
Yeah, I think that's always a really interesting question because it's about leadership elections, which are always a really interesting time in politics. But look, realistically, I don't want to preempt that because it's too early to say. I know that there'll be a number of people who put their name in their hat in the ring, and rightly so. I think what we have in the Conservative Party ultimately is a very, very broad pool of talent. I think there are a number of people out there who would be able to present very bold ambitions and visions for this country. What we have facing us at the moment are some of the biggest challenges we've faced for centuries, and I think what we'll need is someone with fresh ideas, someone who knows essentially how we can deal with the cost of living crisis, Russia and Ukraine, that the property market. I think those will be some of the driving questions when it comes to the next leadership election. And I'm looking forward to seeing what people in the party put forward. I think it's too early to say really who is best placed to take that position, but we'll get to that point and we'll get to the debates, and I look forward to those debates.
All right, we'll be keeping a close eye on what happens next in the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Ali, Ben, Dennis, thanks very much. And thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Jafar Hasnan. See you next time.